Good morning to all, and first of all, I congratulate the congregation of the Agustinian Recollect Sisters of the Philippines for their golden anniversary as a congregation of pontifical right. And the sacrifices of the sisters today are rooted, no, in the sacrifices of their foundresses. No? When you talk about Beaterio, Beaterio is an institution in the colonial Spanish, we might say, period, where mestizas and native Filipinas, no, were members. Because the only canonical monastery at that time, the contemplative monastery of St. Clare in Intramuros, by Spanish law, could only accept Spanish women. And vocations to the religious life were limited, especially to the natives. So the only way to practice their or to live with their vocation is by becoming a beata. No? The beata of the Spanish period is now the beata that we call today. No, they are old maids and they only go to church. That's not the beata of the 16th and 17th century. No, when you call about the beatas, they are members of the third order, living in community, and they were allowed to keep the vows only at the point of death under the supervision of a religious priest who was their spiritual director. We knew in Philippine church history that the first beaterio founded was that of the RVM sisters, no? The Beaterio de la Compañía, no? Under Mother Ignacia del Espiritu Santo. Then afterwards, we have the Beaterio de Santa Catalina de Siena under Mother Francisca del Espiritu Santo. These two beaterios were located in Intramuros. No? But the Recollect Beaterio is outside of Intramuros. We call it Extramuros. No? The Beaterio de San Sebastian de Calumpang, which is now, no, in Plaza del Carmen, facing the San Sebastian Basilica. It is one of the beaterios located outside of Intramuros. The second one was in Pasig, no, founded by the Augustinian fathers. Now, when you talk about the beaterio, it is I said first it is a movement, then as an institution. And there are three kinds of beatas in the Spanish period. We have the family beata. She would make the promise of chastity, poverty, and obedience, yet stays with her family, but shun away from the social activities of the family. But she would dedicate her apostolate privately. This is called the family beata. No? Second is the beata that is a hermit, solitary beata. She would go away, from her native house and stay in a cave or outside of the town, living in a nipa hut, where she lived alone, and dedicate her life to prayer and good works. And the third is what we call the community of beatas. They are members of the same third order, professing the third order way of life, and they live together in one community, supervised by the religious order or congregation who are guiding them. These are the three kinds of beatas in the Spanish colonial period. What is interesting, noted by Dr. Luciano P.R. Santiago, who wrote a first scientific, we might say, biography of the Talangpaz sisters. The first other two foundresses, Mother Ignacia, was a Chinese mestiza, while Mother Francisca was a Spaniard, or Spanish mestiza. But the foundresses of the Beaterio de San Sebastian, which is now the congregation of the Agustinian, were two full-blooded native sisters, from Bulacan, Calumpit, Bulacan, and they belong to the Principalia class, even though they were Indias, they belong to a noble family, and they were regarded with respect by the Spanish authority at that time. They were called the Principalia family. They were former members of the native nobility before the Spanish conquests. No? So they were educated and they were well off. No? And these two sisters underwent the transformation. First, they were called the family beatas, then solitary beatas, and later on, no, they went to San Sebastian de Calumpang, which is now Quiapo. They became a member of the community of beatas, the communal beatas. I will not, in my presentation, I will not give you the biography. You have your books, no? And it's already printed, no? And this was written by by Sister Lirio, no? And I was one of the collaborators of Sister Lirio in preparing the yellow book that you have, the Beaterio, the congregation, the history of your congregation from Beaterio to congregation. So I will not deal with the we might say, biodata of your foundresses. Rather, I will concentrate on two archival materials, which was translated already to English by Professor Luis Emmanuel Romanillos, from Spanish to English, which I'm now using in this presentation. And I have my own translation also as I examine other archival documents about the sisters and the Beaterio. No? So there were two, we might say, historians of the Beaterio and the Talangpaz sisters during the early foundation of the Beaterio de San Sebastian de Calumpang. They were Father Andres de San Fulgencio and Father Benito de San Pablo. Both were vital in the, we might say, history, because they chronicled the history of the sisters and the foundation of the Beaterio. No? The first one was a letter addressed to the Governor General by Father Andres, de San Fulgencio, to Governor Fernando Valdez Itamon, explaining the nature and the vocation of the native sisters in the Beaterio. They were not forced; they willingly joined the Beaterio, and he gave a history of the Beaterio in that short letter dated in 1735. The second data is the chronicle, the history, written by Father Benito de San Pablo, of the beginnings, the early foundation of the Beaterio. This was later in 1745, years after the death of the Talangpaz sisters, 20 years later. And Father Benito was very much connected with the history, because he was there in Intramuros, observing the development of the Beaterio. Okay, and what was very important, when the sisters were expelled, not defract, because of the conflict about maintaining the Beaterio, when he was the provincial in 1728, Father Benito ordered the prior of San Sebastian, Father Cristobal de Soledad, to readmit the Talangpaz sisters and the other members of the Beaterio and renew their promise as members of the Beaterio. That was in 1728. So that's why Father Benito was closely monitoring the development of the Beaterio when he was provincial at that time. So these two recollect fathers, are vital in the early history of the Beaterio. That's why I did not use the word Calumpit, from Calumpit to Calumpang, as if they are traveling only, as if you are taking Victory Liner, or any bus going to leaving Calumpit or going to Quiapo, para kang as if you took up Baliwag bus liner, no. I added a subtitle, A Spiritual Odyssey. Why? Why? Remember, when you talk about Calumpit and Calumpang, they are trees. Mga puno, they are trees. If the name of the town is very native and localized, it is named after a plant or a tree. For example, our mission in Masinloc. Masinloc is a native plant in Masinloc. That's why the mission called it Masinloc, and the town was called Masinloc, Zambales. Calumpit because of the calumpit tree that was dominant in the town. Calumpang tree at that time was dominant in what is now Quiapo, because Quiapo was a marshy area where there were many calumpang trees at that time. No? Calumpit tree, no, bears a fruit, no, that is good for making jams. While the calumpang tree produces seed, no, for healing, for oil, for other, we might say, healing and we may, products for the oil, and using oil for the lamps that was used at that time. They have no electricity. The seed of the calumpang tree oil was extracted. No, so trees were very vital at that in the life of the people at that time. Which the amenities were so limited, unlike our times today. No, we have plenty of amenities, but at that time the amenities were provided by nature. Okay. Now, what is this, we might say, symbolism of a tree? Okay. Remember, trees are very symbolic in literature. No? They are used to represent life, no? Growth in mythologies, legends, and even in novels. No? Novels, no? They will always refer to a tree. Trees are considered represented life, wisdom, and power and prosperity. Philosophers regard trees as observers witnessing the evolution of humans and the planet around them. We are not here, that the trees are already here. No? Cutting a tree is very sad because the tree is a silent witness of our transformation as human beings. No? Transformation of our society from barrio to town, town to cities, and yet we cut trees. No? The silent witnesses of our growth. No, that is the tragedy. No, trees protected us, but we don't protect trees. No, cities were founded along rivers because the river is the source of life of every town, because it is the river who provides them drinking water, no, food, and transportation, and yet we polluted them. That is the tragedy of the day. We never give thanks to Mother Nature. But at that time, no, people were aware that trees are vital in their survival and in their history. The trees in the Bibles are mentioned. No? Remember, in the Bible, it began with a tree, the fall of man, and it ended up with a tree, with the crucifixion of the Lord for our salvation. Very early on in the Bible, the book of Genesis, we find trees are mentioned, not just one variety, but of tree of various kinds. No, in chapter 3 of Genesis, the tree, no, of good and evil became the instrument of the downfall of our first parents. But the same tree, the wood that was used for the downfall, was the same, was also the tree. A tree was used for the crucifixion of our Lord for our redemption. So trees are also symbolic in the Bible. They are not mentioned just for their beauty, because each gave fruit with seeds in it. They were given for us to use. This shows God's generosity to us in abundance and variety, so that seeds produce oil that could be used for cooking, lighting, medicinal purposes, and also beauty instruments. Fruits and seeds provided food. What we add in this dish: shade, windbreakers during typhoons, no? Habitats for animals, building construction materials, sweet perfume trees, and incense. And because of the trees that God created, and God saw that it was good. Trees are provided for our, no, protection and human consumption if it is done properly. Interesting enough, the Bible begins with the tree and ends with the tree, and the Savior of the world dies on a tree. Simply put, the history of our salvation is intimately linked with the existence of trees. Similarly, the prophet Jeremiah put the connection of humanity to trees eloquently when describing the man who trusts is in the Lord is like a tree that is planted and it cannot be uprooted. And this, I could say the same thing with the foundresses of the Talangpaz sisters. In Jeremiah chapter 17:8, he is like a tree planted along the waters that sends out roots by the stream and does not fear when he comes, for it lives and remains green, and is not anxious in the year of drought, for it does not cease to bear fruit. That is a strong tree planted near the river, where it gathers water for its sustenance and its growth. The same thing with the Talangpaz sisters. No, they were nestled in a Calumpit tree, but since the nest refused them for their vocation, they transferred to another nest, that is the Calumpang tree. No? Now, the heroic virtues of Dionisia and Cecilia Rosa Talangpaz, no, from the chronicles of Padre Fray Benito de San Pablo. No? Who was he? Let us check his short bio. In 728, he was the prior provincial, and I mentioned before, he was the prior provincial who ordered for the readmission of the Talangpaz sisters after they were defrocked by the irascible prior at that time, Father Diego de San Jose. And in 1740, he became prior of San Sebastian community. 750, again, prior of San Sebastian community and provincial chronicler. 1752, he became prior again of San Sebastian community, and in 1757, he became vicar provincial of the San Nicolas province in Intramuros. So with these assignments, no, and Intramuros is just adjacent to Quiapo, no, divided by a river that is Pasig, it is not impossible for him to monitor the development of the Beaterio, starting with the Talangpaz sisters. So he is a valid an authentic witness and historian of the Beaterio de San Sebastian. So what did he observe about the sisters? As I said, I will not talk about their biodata. You could read them in the books provided you by the congregation, authored by Sister Lirio. Okay? In 1747, Fray Benito de San Pablo wrote the historical account of the Beaterio de San Sebastian de Calumpang. Because San Sebastian Calumpang is the place, no, near Quiapo, after Bilibid Viejo, where San Sebastian Church and Friary are located up to now. And in front of the which was the orchard, became the Beaterio de San Sebastian de Calumpang. And the title of his chronicle was in Spanish, Principio de la Fundación y Progreso del Beaterio de San Sebastián, extramuros de la ciudad de Manila, de Agustinos Recoletos Descalzos. No? The early beginning of the beginning of the foundation and progress of the Beaterio of San Sebastian, outside of Intramuros, of the city of Manila, of the Agustinian Recollect Descalzos. No, literally speaking, if you're going to translate that. No, that was the chronicle. And it was published, transcribed into Spanish, again, from old to readable Spanish by the Bulletin de la Provincia of San Nicolas de Tolentino in the 1970s, when you were raised as a pontifical congregation of pontifical right. Okay. For Fray Benito, no, he referred to the two sisters using some metaphors, no, which were common at that time in the 17th century, metaphors, comparing them to someone or to something, no? As among the upright, as sincere doves that fly to the refuge and sanctuary of this divine mother. Ayan. So he compared two turtle doves, ang dalawang magkapatid, the two sisters, no, flying for refuge, no, to his divine mother, no, alluding to Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Moreover, this sovereign mother summoned these sincere doves. In this manner, we speak of their blameless life in which we knew them until their death. We can declare in order to nourish them with abundant breasts of mercy. Since they were rejected by the Agustinian parish priests to become members of the Agustinian tertiaries in Calumpit, the sisters, like doves, flew from Calumpit to Calumpang in order to attempt to join the Recollect tertiaries, no, in San Sebastian. And not only that, placing themselves under the protection of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. You will be asking, Why Our Lady of Mount Carmel? That's the San Sebastian Church. And is she the patroness of Our Lady of San Sebastian? Well, the patron is San Sebastian. Well, not Our Lady of Mount Carmel Church. Okay, allow me to give you the background. The the present site of what is now San Sebastian, no, convent, and San Sebastian Basilica, together with Santa Rita College and San Sebastian College, no, and wider, no, it was a land belonged to our benefactor, no, in the 17th century. He was Don Bernardo Castillo. He was the captain of the, we might say, detachment of Spanish soldiers stationed in Fort Santiago. He became our benefactor. In 1609, he donated his lot, no, where the Manila Bulletin now standing, to become our first church and community in Intramuros. And in 1621, he donated his land, no, which is now, that is now from Nepomuceno to Legarda, his hacienda, no, to us, and it was given as a retreat house, provided with one condition, that the patron of his chapel in San Sebastian de Calumpang will not be changed. You have to maintain the titular patron of his private chapel, San Sebastian, because he was a soldier, and San Sebastian was the patron of soldiers. So we still observe that agreement. And that agreement is still posted in a brass marker at the main entrance of the convent. We honored that, we might say, agreement, that we still maintain the patron of the benefactor, San Sebastian. Now, why Our Lady of Mount Carmel? Our Lady of Mount Carmel arrived in the Philippines in 1618. She was transferred first to Bagumbayan, then to Intramuros, but we are looking for a proper shrine for her, because we have a tradition among Recollects that we have a secondary Marian patroness for each church or community. So when San Sebastian was founded in May of 1621, because it will be 400 years next year, no, we decided, the provincial decided, to transfer the image of Our Lady of Mount Carmel to become its Marian patroness of San Sebastian Church. That was on May 5, 1621, when she was enthroned in the church, no, adjacent to the community. Okay, that's why San Sebastian Basilica today is the first and the oldest Carmel shrine in the Philippines before the arrival of the Carmelites in the 20th century. So we were given permission by Rome to promote the Carmel devotion and the brown scapular, no? And that's the reason why we still continue the practice today. So why did they decide to go to San Sebastian and place under the protection of Our Lady of Mount Carmel? Simple. They were already devotees of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. They knew, because the confraternity of Our Lady of Mount was already spreading, around Manila and the provinces around Manila. The Bulaqueños are devotees, of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. The Bulaqueños, especially in what is now Bustos and Barasuain, near Malolos. When the devotees dedicated their chapel, which became the church of Our Lady of Mount Carmel in Barasuain. The patroness of Barasuain Church is Our Lady of Mount Carmel. In Sabang, in Baliwag, Bulacan, I was able to interview the parishioners. They said that their ancestors were members of the confraternity of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. That's why when they founded a church and it was created upon, they dedicated it to Our Lady of Mount Carmel. So the devotion was spreading. And the one who spread the devotion in the Talangpaz clan in Calumpit was the maternal uncle of the Talangpaz sister. He was a Jesuit lay brother. He is, I think his name is Felipe Songson. And an article and research was made by Dr. Luciano P.R. Santiago about this Jesuit brother. He was with Pedro Calungsod and Padre Diego San Vitores when they were martyred in the Mariares, in Guam. So when they were, and he was wounded, Felipe Songson, And when he died, he was already in Manila. When he transferred the body, they opened the habit, and they found a brown scapular, no, that he was wearing under his Jesuit habit. So it is a hypothesis that this brother, a relative on the mother's side of the Talangpaz sisters, had already introduced the devotion to the family. And the sisters knew her shrine. So since they were rejected by the parish priest of Calumpit, they decided to go to Calumpang, no, Quiapo, where they know that under the eyes of the Blessed Mother, under the title of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, no, their desire to become religious, closing quotation, beatas, would be fulfilled. So this was the observation of Father Benito. They are like doves, no, pure. They are pure and blameless, which he said, we knew until their death, that they flew from Calumpit to Calumpang in order to be fed, no, by the prayers of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. That's very poetic, no. In other words, they were already having this sanctity of life, the heroic virtues of perseverance and chastity, and most of all, their dedication to prayer life. Yan. That's very interesting. At this point, no, he also used that the two sisters emulate the gospel, no. Before leaving Calumpit, they left everything, and what they had, they gave everything and distributed them to the poor. No, that is the very gospel demand. Do not look back. No, the things that you carry are only extras. No, give them to the poor, and you will have riches in heaven. And this what they did before leaving Calumpit. They unburdened what is, no, the baggages that are not necessary in order to pursue their vocations. No? It is a reminder that to follow Christ is to leave everything behind and entrust everything to Christ. No, they're like thirsty those. No? There are those that are thirsty, seeking, we might say, no, the water that would quench, the spiritual waters that would quench their spiritual thirst, according to the chronicler. The recollected chronicler further discloses to us that without telling anybody about their plans, they went out of their town of Calumpit, and like thirsty does, they ran to drink and quench their thirst in the everlasting founts of the breasts of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. It's poetic. Today we are thirsty for what is spiritual, which the world cannot give us. And the Talangpaz sisters, only God, through the prayers of the Blessed Mother, can quench our spiritual thirst. No? Whenever we leave, we are fond of despedida parties. No? Despedida dito, despedida doon. What would happen later on? I do not know. But the sisters left Calumpit silently. No parties, no fanfare. They suddenly left like doves flying, no? Flying towards Calumpang without anybody noticing them. Why? They were seeking the waters that will quench their spiritual thirst, and they found it in San Sebastian de Calumpang, in the image of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Furthermore, Fray Benito deeply admired Dionisio and Cecilia Rosa Talangpaz in their practice of the virtues of patience and perseverance. In a society that is macho domineering, you need to practice the virtues of patience and perseverance. No? With repeated rejections by the Augustinian parish priest of Calumpit, no, they were distressed that they never desisted from the life of withdrawal and their vocation. Never. The parish priest of Calumpit rejected their pleas, but they were never discouraged. No, they were rejected, but they never desisted from their vocation. They went on with their confessions and communions, asking God and His Most Holy Mother of Mount Carmel would grant their perseverance in the objectives if they would be appropriate for the greater honor and glory of His Divine Majesty and His Most Holy Mother. Okay, so thanks to their spiritual director, an Augustine record, is Father Juan de Santo Tomas Aquino, who was
Tagalista, he spoke Tagalog. He became the first confessor of the Talangpaz sisters when they arrived in Calumpang, San Sebastian, in 1719. So from 1719 to 7, they were tested and being observed by the Recollect Fathers if they are qualified to become members of the Third Order. No? And they were done. They passed the, we might say, test, and they were invested as members of the Third Order of the Agustinian Recollects, no? The Mantelata sisters, no, based on our ritual. No, we are not, but the qualifications have to be observed. And they were invested on July 16, 1725. And the prior at that time was Father Diego de San Jose. And it was he who built the nipa hut in the garden where the sisters and there were 2 other or 4 more who joined the Talangpaz sisters in their spiritual odyssey. Thus, on July 16, 1725, 6 years later after the arrival in Calumpang, the Beaterio de San Sebastian was officially founded. But it was short-lived. Remember, if your vocation is true, it has to be tested and purified. And it was tested and purified. No? The test of the vocation of the sisters. In another occasion, the prior of San Sebastian, Fray Diego de San Jose, had ordered outright the demolition of the Talangpaz sisters' nipa house and the removal of their Third Order habits. Why? Because many were seeking admission and they had no money to maintain the Beaterio. At that time, in the 18th century, the Recollect missions in the Visayas and Mindanao were being attacked by pirates from Mindanao. And they could not economically, they were hard up. So the community was divided and there were arguments pro and cons in maintaining or disbanding the Beaterio. Out of exasperation, he was exasperated, no? He wanted to maintain the unity of the community, no? The same nipa hut which he built for the city, it was he who demolished it by his own hands and expelled the Beatas, and before expelling them, he told them to return the habits and the order of their constitute the way of life. No. The afflicted and disconsolate Dionysian Cecilia withdrew to their lowly hut in Calumpang. No? They went back to Bilibid Viejo, no? Distraught, crying. No? However, according to Father Benito, they always kept themselves strong and steadfast in their primary vocation with an unfaltering hope in the shelter of the mantle of the Virgin of Mount Carmel. I always ask my formans, you have a vocation, right? What is your principle in order for you to protect, to nourish your vocation as a religious? What is your principle in life? If you don't have any principle, you're just like a ship without an anchor. You're just follow the waves, and there is no destination, no, where you will arrive. The problem is today, people, no, might have principles, but they are wrong principles in life. I qualified that again. What is your religious principles in order for you to clarify your vocation in life, to pursue your vocation in spite of the, we might say, temptations and trials that you encounter along the way? And the principles of these 2 Talangpaz sisters, no, was fidelity to prayer and confidence in Our Lady of Mount Carmel. In Tagalog, yun ang kanilang pinanghahawakan. They held to this principle because they believed it was the right thing to do in spite of the trials that they face every day in a male-dominated Spanish colonial society. They remained faithful to God because it was God who's the source of their vocation, and they were hopeful that the Lady of Mount Carmel, under her mantle, will always protect them along the way, which did after 3 years of waiting. The 2 sisters very well knew and understood that God threatens those in tribulation and not keep sustenance and perseverance in suffering and tolerance by God. Everything. If you want to serve God, be ready for trials in Sirach chapter 2, verses 1 to 11. The book of Sirach chapter 2, 1 to 11 delineates everyone who desire to follow and serve God. Be ready for trials. For trials are the fire of purification of your motives. Aware as they will, the blessed is he who is patient and steadfastness suffers temptation and misfortune for the love of God. We always undergo that temptation and trials. They were on with their daily chores. They went on. In spite of they were expelled. No? They were expelled from their beatitude. They went back to Bilibid in their old tenement house. They still went to San Sebastian for daily masses and reception of the sacraments. They cleaned the church as they were used when they were beatas. It was the same virtue of perseverance that eventually won over Padre Fray Diego de San Jose over the holy objective, according to the chronicler Father Benito de San Pablo. Fidelity, patience, and most of all, respect to the authorities who expelled them. On July 16, 1708, by the order of Fray Benito de San Pablo, who was then at that time was the new prior provincial of San Nicolas province, based in Intramuros, ordered the readmission of the Talangpaz sisters and the other members who were expelled by the previous prior, Padre Diego, and reinvest them with the tertiary habit and restore them restore their beaterio. And this was done by the next prior, Fray Cristobal de la Soledad. So, 3 years of patience, 3 years of purification paid off. Because Father Benito saw the sincerity and the purity of intentions of the two sisters. Because their actions speak louder than words. They were not just visionaries. They're women of visions. Visionaries talk about what they want to do. Women of vision, they do of what they dream of their life. More action, less talking. What really attracted Padre Fray Benito's attention was the Talangpaz sisters' simplicity and their lifestyle of withdrawal from the world. Their good example, their profound piety and frequent reception of the sacraments, as well as carrying out their spiritual exercises faithfully. When you talk about spiritual retreat. In the crucibles of sorrows, they lifted up their eyes to God and to Our Lady, begging her with endless pleas never to abandon them. Because they were pioneering a new way of life. Religious beatas. They were not canonical religious. They were not lay persons. Who were they? They are neither fish nor fowl. Beatas. They were illegal in the Spanish society. Yet, they persevered. The Archbishop wanted to control them, to visit them, but the religious refused. They wanted the Beatas to be independent. The Governor General demanded that the Beatas are lay persons. They have to pay the taxes. And the religious defended them, petitioning the King of Spain to grant royal protection on the Beaterio. With that grant of royal protection of the Beaterio, the Beatas were now recognized legally in the patronatorial system of Spanish Philippines. They were allowed to live as religious based on the third order rule. They could open their bed to teach girls their catechism. And moreover, they were allowed to profess the religious vows at the point of death. And lastly, under that royal protection, the Beatas were exempted from paying the colonial taxes. These were the works of the Recollect Fathers who were guiding the Beaterio and the Beatas throughout the centuries. Now let's go. The earlier letter. If Father Benito wrote it in 1747, but he was there, an active observer of the Beaterio, This one, who was the prime provincial at that time, wrote to the Governor General Fernando Valdez Itamon in 1710, informing him about the Beaterio de Santos and the Beatas. There were rumors, allegedly that the Beatas were forced to take the vows and open. And in order to dispel these rumors, the prior provincial that in May of 1735 wrote to the governor clarifying the issues. First, the Beatas were not forced to be members of the Beaterio. They willingly came and entered the Beaterio at their own volition, and they are free, to live or not, because they have no vows, only a promise as member of the Third Order. So he said, in this letter addressed to the governor, called by this sovereign image, Our Lady of Mount Carmel, 4 young Indian maidens came in 1719 with mind bent on devoting themselves to God and to her most holy mother. So their arrival is 1719. Their investiture was 1725. So we have to clarify that. Whose resolve they confirmed through such recollection in the residence and most exemplary way of life and frequent reception of the holy sacraments, and this holy exercise may increase in number on the same pace as their ardent wishes to seek through the official request to don the holy habit of the Augustinian Recollect Third Order, called also a term mantelatas, because they wear a long mantle, which was their veil. Okay. After long experiences and trials, you have to wait for 6 years. My predecessors, the prelates of this province, found it convenient to submit the repeated requests in granting them the permission to don in public the investiture of the habit of the Augustinian Recollect Mantelatas to the fame of their good way of life and continuous recollection with which they resided in their house. Other native maidens became interested. Yun. Remember, there was no vocation campaign. There were no vocation materials. I repeat, actions speak louder than words. Actions speak louder than posters or the internet. The recollected lives of the two sisters became the message. In the residence in Bilibid before their investiture in 1725, they were already observing the life of a religious, penance, fasting, abstinence, silence that is requirement for recollection and prayer. And many native maidens, mga binibini, were attracted by the way they lived. They were not visionaries. They were women of vision. They were living their vision, not just talking about it. Moved by God and roused by the exemplary life of the sisters, they joined them and followed in their holy exercises for some years. And called God and by the Most Holy Mother through official repeated requests, they asked to wear the holy habit. After being tested and trained, they were granted the same on the date. This is do not be. They were only granted 6 years later, 1725. So Father Fulgencio made an error here in computing the investiture. The arrival was 1719, but the investiture after 6 years, 1725, July 16, the feast day of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. When he wrote this letter in 735, he added, their number has reached 10. So when he was writing this letter to the Governor General, there were already 10 members of the Beaterio de San Sebastian at that time. For them to live with some degree of comfort with financial support of my province by means of alms, their house was rebuilt in the same way the natives of this land make use of the same materials, anipahat with sawali walls. No? Imagine they were also begging at that time, depending on the work of their brow by embroidery, cleaning the purificators, the altar linens. They received the small from the province because the province at that time had hard up economically because of the piratical raids of their missions. Father Fulgencio said, I can assure you, Your Excellency, that at present they experience more spiritual edification than material. In other words, they were not they don't worry about material things. What they worry them is their spiritual growth and their dependence in God. This is attested by almost all known personalities of the city of Manila, their donors and benefactors, and the women who were attracted to their way of life, whom they erected an exemplary withdrawal and lifestyle as if among colleagues, collegiality. No? They are living in community, and their community was an edified community, an example for everybody. Today, they are at liberty to live when, how, or where they wish to. But they, the sisters, voluntarily rebuffed by depriving themselves only to devote fully to the service of God, our Lord, and in the service of God, in the service of God, our Lord, and especially to the Most Holy Virgin of Carmel, and frequently receive the sacraments. Okay. The prior provincial goes on. I have pulled all the understanding of your excellency so that you will be aware of the principles means and present state to you, will deign to grant your permission as the representative of the king, as the vice patron, and in the name of the king, our master, may God keep him for many years, for the Mantalata sisters to persevere in their state of way of living as community, and giving providences in information that are convenient to the perseverance of such good and holy principles. And, last part of the letter, for him and for this permit as wise. In other words, the prior provincial Father Andres de San Polo was asking royal license to grant the function and recognition of the Beaterio and the Beatas living in it. So that in this view, he would be able to deem what was most convenient for the stability and greater welfare of the said Mantel. So once that there's given a royal license, the Beaterio will function as a normal convent, stable, without being persecuted by the state because of some irregularities. Okay? And by serving to inform that their most exemplary way of life redound to the well-being of Christianity in this island. In other words, what we can do? Grant permission because their exemplary lives sustain, promotes the Christian way of life in the islands. I do not doubt that Your Excellency as eyewitnesses would condescend as soon as possible to grant the said permit and information of the said Mantelatas, the Beatas. See how the Recollects defended, promoted, and most of all, help sustain and maintain the Beaterio in spite of the economic hardship that the province of San Nicolas was experiencing in the 18th century. In other words, the Recollect fathers were the spiritual fathers of the Beaterio, and behind the strength in front of a male-dominated society in the Spanish regime. They were the protectors of the Beatas. Okay, observations. These are my observations. The tree rooted in the grounds is like in the gospel, a house built on rock that will never be shaken or destroyed by the flood. If our vocation is rooted in God, like a tree, or built upon a rock, any trials, any temptation will not destroy our vocation. Only we destroy our vocation because of our negligence, slothfulness, and most of all, our pride. These are the things, the sins that destroy our vocation. Rather, the vocation to become holy comes from God. And if we are rooted in God and rooted in our prayer life, our vocation is like a tree rooted deeply or a house built on rock. The tree watered by the river of Calumpit or the marshes of Calumpang de Quiapo is like grace that watered the souls and vocations of Dionisia and Cecilia Rosa and other beatas that followed them through the reception of the sacraments and daily practice of silence and prayers. Grace must have a channel, and the channel where are the sacraments, the Holy Mass, confession, examination of conscience, the practice of silence and prayers that will enable us to be recollected always that we feel the presence of God in our life who called us to be holy. That what is meant to become a tree deeply rooted, like a house built on a rock. And this is the vocation of the Talangpaz sisters. The Beatas were able to overcome the trials they encountered in the early foundation and development of the Beaterio. They were the first women's liberation movement, as we use the present lingo today, in the Spanish regime, so to say. However, they do not bring to the streets their demands for equal treatment in the Spanish colonial society. No, they did not make placards and paraded themselves demanding equal treatment. No, they never joined a rally. They never created a rally at that time. Rather, they fought for recognition through prayers and determination to be faithful in their vocation. That is to be a tree rooted deeply in the soil or a house built on rock. Rallies are good today. Yes, we can do that. But how about prayer? Do we pray for our leaders? Do we pray for those people who are corrupt? We are now in a pandemic and still graft and corruption is still being observed by some, or I would say many, no, in our society today. No? Our people are suffering, and yet suffering are still being imposed because of graft and corruption. Do we pray for our leaders? As what the Talangpaz sisters did when they pray for the recollects, no? Hoping that they will be readmitted in the tertiary, no? As mantelatas. Joaquin, he died in 2004, in his article Beatas of the 17th and 18th century, said that the Beatas were revolutionary mystic and women of vision. The women of vision, I added it. No? For him, they were revolutionary mystics. He wrote, but the Beatas have it over the revolutionaries. They were above the revolutionary. Mysticism has proved to be harder and more durable foundation rather than the katipunan of the 19th century. The patriot secular societies, the Katipunan, the La Liga Filipina, the Mais, etc., not excluding the Katipunan, they are included here in these patriot secular societies, had the Nigaskogon character of native endeavor. Why did they Katipunan? It was Nigaskogon. They wanted to have a revolution, independence without preparation. It died out. And among the Katipuneros, they fought among themselves because of personal ambition. If you have watched the movie General Luna and Gregorio del Pilar, you know what I meant. But the Beaterio founded by ecstatics, these are people who are in ecstasy in prayer, which has lasted from the 17th century to our days. Surviving kings, bishops, governments, wars, and revolution have turned out to be the most enduring creations of native enterprise. Still growing, still in progress in the 21st century. Hindi po to Nigaskogon. Because the Beaterio was a product of love rooted in prayer and sacrifice. This was described by the late Dr. Luciano Pierre Santiago in his book, To Love and to Suffer, the early Beaterios of the Philippines. They may have proved to be so adaptable to every shift of history because they were based on audacity and experiment. Imagine that the only canonical monastery to become a religious was the contemplative monastery of St. Clare near Port Santiago in Intramuros. These women, undoubted, audacious, experimented a new way of life in order to live their religious vocation in such a fashion. No, they were called beatas. Audacity and experiment. Do you have still that life of your foundresses, audacity and experiment? in order for the tree to grow, to spread, not only in the Philippines, but outside of the Philippines. From Calumpit to Calumpang, it should be from Calumpit to Calumpang, from Calumpang to the world. Audacity and experiment. These words of Nick Joaquin still challenge the daughters of the Beaterios they founded. The tree needed to be grafted and planted outside of the Philippines, where other women of other nationalities may stay and protected by the shadow of its branches. Charism, my dear friends, is not exclusive. It is inclusive. It is the gift of Pentecost that the apostles did not limit Jerusalem, but they went out and spread Christianity, embracing all nationalities with audacity and experiment. Can we do that? With audacity and experiment, that the tree that was planted in Calumpang will be replanted, transferred to other countries, where the spirit of the foundresses will be witnessed by other women of other nationalities. So with this talk, I end this first part, and we will now have the Beaterio for the second part.